Yeah, let's take a look here. I guess the way to do this is sort of the big battleground here. And what I mean is we're going to look at it from two perspectives. First of all, where are the states? Are there any states where Donald Trump thinks he can flip blue states that Hillary Clinton won in 2016? There are three the Trump campaign's been talking about. It's New Hampshire, Minnesota, and Nevada. And you got to say, going into the night, the burden is on Trump to show that he really has a shot in these states as the votes come in, because the polling definitely in New Hampshire, in Minnesota, to a lesser extent Nevada. The polling, though, has put Biden ahead in all of these states. You know, New Hampshire is the first one of these we're going to get a readout from. We want to see tonight, are there any blue states from 2016 that are not going to be Biden states in 2020? The polling suggests Trump has an uphill fight in all of them. So if those stay blue, if you just for the moment keep those in the Democratic column, Biden starts out where Hillary Clinton finished in 2016. And that leaves a battleground that is filled with states that Donald Trump carried in 2016 and where he's playing defense in 2020, trying to stay at or above 270 electoral votes. And you talked about this at the top. Of all of these battleground states, which two are Donald Trump's poll numbers right now the worst? Where is he facing the biggest and most persistent gaps? It's these two states right here. It is Wisconsin and it is Michigan. That has continued to the end of this campaign. If you look at the polling averages, Trump faces the biggest gaps right here. That's why you have so much attention on Pennsylvania. So if Donald Trump is not able to pick up a Wisconsin and is not able to pick up a Michigan and is not able to flip any states that Hillary Clinton carried in 2016, now we're looking at this for a battleground. Let's go into the night with that in mind. You mentioned Florida, 7 p.m., most of Florida, not the Panhandle, but the rest of Florida. We're going to start getting election returns from there. You got Florida, you got North Carolina at 7:30. North Carolina, a lot like Florida, tons of early vote. State that's used to counting, processing, and reporting out quickly early vote. I think we can get a lot of results from North Carolina as well. 7 o'clock is Georgia, although there may be some delays here in getting vote reported out in the core Democratic area, Atlanta, the surrounding area as well. That might be a little bit later reporting. We'll see how that goes with Georgia. Ohio, 7:30. Early voting state, mail voting, processing early. We could get a lot from Ohio and Texas. And what this sets up in the first 3 or 4 hours of election night are a series of make or break tests for Donald Trump in states he carried in 2016, states where the polling, as you have been talking about, is very shaky for him. If he's unable to flip any blue states from 2016, and if he's unable to pull off a Hail Mary pass in a Wisconsin or a Michigan, then all 5 of these states, any one of them, would be an elimination contest. Look, if he were to lose Georgia, for instance, under this combination, Biden would be over 270. If Trump were to lose North Carolina in this combination, Biden would go over 270. That would certainly be true if he were to lose Florida. Florida, in fact, would give Biden a little bit of pad. He could even afford losing, for instance, Wisconsin would still be over 270 in that scenario. So these all become elimination contests essentially for Donald Trump in those early hours. Now, if he can fight his way through those early hours and win the states we're talking about here, the next big test for Trump, well, 2 big tests come. One is the 2nd congressional district of Nebraska. It is essentially Omaha, metropolitan Omaha. This is an area that Trump won by 3 points in 2016. Remember, they give them out by congressional districts in Nebraska. Democrats have felt very bullish about this district because of the demographics we talk about all the time. The next test then would become Arizona. And if the Democrats are getting Nebraska, too, and if Trump has somehow survived all 5 states we talked about here, Arizona is an elimination contest, because that plus Nebraska, too, would also, under this combination, get Joe Biden there. So you see it. Tonight, Trump has got to win state after state after state to stay alive. If he does, we can then start talking about Pennsylvania. Must win Pennsylvania. He's got to get through. Trump does all these other states to bring it down to Pennsylvania. If he's able to bring it down to Pennsylvania, that is the state where we expect to have the slow count, the mail-in ballots that could take days. That's where that scenario could kick in, that this could take a while. But Trump's got a lot of work to do before he can get there.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.